Hey there, I'm Jerry, a DIY track guy, and has this ever happened to you? You're minding your own business installing a new set of coilovers and you're suddenly struck by the thought, hey, these control arm bushings are super old and need to be replaced. That's where I am right now. It's a good thing I have these. These are Whiteline polyurethane control arm bushings for an NA Miata, and this kit includes all the bushings required to do the entire car. These have been waiting patiently in my basement for so long that my buddy Alex, who helped me order these, bought, installed, and sold the Miata that his went into. Needless to say, this job is long overdue, so let's get right into it.
So why replace bushings? The factory rubber bushings are squishy and elastic, so they do a good job of absorbing and isolating noise, vibrations, and harshness as we're going down the road. But as all things do, they age and degrade over time, eventually failing. These polyurethane Whiteline bushings are much less squishy. We can geek out on how these work later on, but first let's take a look at what's included in the package.
Now, this is the stuff for the rear control arms, and there's a few different things that we need to organize.
We have these metal sleeves that come in a few different lengths and wall thickness, these big ass washers, a bunch of the actual polyurethane bushing halves, which are thankfully numbered, a few packets of high performance bushing lube, and these very important but slightly erroneous instructions. To ensure we can find things when we need them, let's get everything separated into their respective piles. Last video we went about removing our rear coilover by disconnecting the sway bar end link, the lower shock bolt, getting it out of the lower control arm cup, and removing the upper shock mount nuts. With that out of the way, that makes it easier for us to remove the rear upper control arm. First, let's remove the rearward inboard control arm nut. Then the forward nut, using the convenient subframe cutout that Mazda engineers graciously put in there in 1989. Then the outboard nut. And we pull the outer bolt, freeing the control arm from the knuckle. Finally, we remove the two inboard bolts, freeing the control arm from the chassis.
Over at the workbench, we got this thing set up in the vise, and we're going to start to work on these bushings. And for that, we're going to use a 3-jaw puller.
The process for removing bushings from all the control arms is pretty much the same, so pay attention. On the inner side of the bushing, we'll first cut away the rubber lip that goes around the bushing with a utility knife. Then we set up the puller with the jaws like so, with the tip of the screw rod pressing onto the metal bushing sleeve. Mine's larger than the sleeve bore, but if not, we could use a big washer. And now we can start turning that screw rod. We use an impact gun here, but it tends to rattle the puller apart, which is kind of dangerous, so be careful. Alright, let's do it again for the second one.
We got the two bushings out, that was fairly easy. And back over here on the knuckle, let's see if we can't remove it in the same way. Doink. Inside the bore here, it's a little bit rusty, so let's just give it a quick clean with a wire wheel.
Now that that's nice and clean, let's get the new polyurethane bushing installed, and the first task is to lube up the bore. Okay, yes, lube, haha, very funny. Okay, let's apply some lubricant to the bushing halves. Press them in, and press in the sleeve.
There we go.
One of the cool things about working on cars is that we get to disassemble stuff and figure out how it works. And while control arms may seem insignificant and boring, especially compared to turbos, engine swaps, and even coilovers, much of a car's uniqueness comes down to its suspension. And Miatas have always been critically praised as one of the best handling cars on the market, to the point of cliche. But its ability to inspire confidence and generate smiles for miles is a direct result of the double wishbones on all four corners and its finely tuned suspension geometry. Thanks, Mazda engineers. Here's our 36-year-old bushing that we just removed, and notice how there's a metal sleeve in the center that's surrounded by rubber. It still has some of its elasticity. They're pressed into a control arm and bolted through to the subframe, and the clamping force is such that the sleeve is held in a fixed position. The rubber outer part of the bushing is also held fixed in the control arm and doesn't move. So to maybe debunk a myth, as the suspension articulates up and down, the control arm doesn't pivot around the bolt, sleeve, or between the rubber and the control arm. It's the rubber itself that's twisting or deflecting, and that contributes to wear over time and eventual failure. Now, with the polyurethane bushings, as we saw, they come in two halves, easing the installation process. And we also saw the metal sleeve is easily pressed in. When we bolt the control arm to the subframe or knuckle, just like the factory bushing, the sleeve is held in a fixed position. But with these, the bushing rotates or pivots around the sleeve. That's why we have this knurled interior finish to help capture the grease. But eventually the grease does get washed out, they bind up and make a hell of a racket. Now this is PTFE, or polytetrafluoroethylene tape, also known by its brand name, Teflon tape. PTFE is a synthetic polymer and has some pretty OP properties, like being inert, hydrophobic, and here's a good one, it has one of the lowest coefficients of friction of any solid. Yep, we're using plumber's tape as a solid lubricant. So let's get this stuff installed into our control arm. The process is pretty much the same for each bushing, so try to pay attention. First thing is to apply some lube to the outside of the two bushing halves and set them aside. Then we apply some lubricant to the sleeve. No, stop it. Bad editor. Now with the PTFE tape, we start by overlapping the edge, winding it around, and overlapping itself. Notice how the tape sticks to the lubricant? Then we add a thin layer of lubricant on top of the tape. There's a bit of technique to hold the tape in place with one hand and stretching and laying it with the other. Shift the thumb over and repeat. Then we prepare the control arm bore with a bit of lubricant. Oh, we're gonna get demonetized! Alright, now we insert one half of the bushing into the bore, twisting it in the direction of the tape so it doesn't bunch up, and press it the rest of the way in. And as we mentioned, the outside of the bushing where it's held captive in the control arm isn't meant to move, but adding a bit of tape will help prevent any incidental binding and squeaks. Now we can add tape to the sleeve in the same way, starting with overlapping the edge, winding it around the sleeve, and overlapping the other edge. Notice here I didn't completely cover the whole sleeve, but for the others I did. Finally, we lube up the inside of the bushing. Don't you f***ing dare. Slide the sleeve in by hand, and with a clamp, press it the rest of the way in. The sleeve should be flush on both sides, and notice how a bit of the tape slid out? That's totally okay. Remember, this stuff stretches like spider webs, and it just takes a little to keep it from binding. And that's pretty much how it's done. And you remember that this is our chassis side. I just cleaned it up a little bit with a wire wheel, applying just a tiny bit of grease. There we go. New control arm, looking really nice. Next up, let's take out the lower control arm. And the first bolt we need to break loose is that one right there. It's a little bit rusty, but compared to some of the others that I've seen, this is pretty mint. Dirt in the eyes. Okay, and as mentioned before, the process for removing the old bushings is exactly the same as we just did. Secure the control arm in your bench vise, and if you don't have one, bro, it's kind of a must-have tool for any garage. Anyways, let's cut off the lip, set up the puller, and this time I use a ratcheting breaker bar to press the sleeve out. But it gets stuck right here. Someone made fun of me for using my creme brulee little lighter thing here to try to heat up the stuck bolts in my engine block. But today I have a secret weapon. Just kidding, we're gonna use a propane torch. Oh, it's catching fire. And just like that, we've got all the techniques needed to remove the bushings. So off camera, I do the rest, clean up the arm, and install the poly bushes like before.
And we're back. Here's the control arm, nicely painted, bushings installed.
For the outboard side of the control arm, Whiteline includes these two big washers. Notice one's thicker and the other's thinner. So let's grease up the bushings, position the control arm on the knuckle, tap the long bolt through, and install the thin washer and nut. And a quick note, I torqued things up loosely here, intentionally shy of their torque specs. The best practice for torquing up control arms is to first drop the vehicle onto its wheels so the vehicle's static weight compresses the suspension into its default position, and then torque them up. Also, I'm missing a coil over here. Here we are at the front left corner, and let's quickly step through the removal process.
First up, let's remove the bottom bolt from the shock.
Now let's pull the cotter pin from the upper ball joint. Loosen the castle nut, but leave it just threaded on. Then strike the knuckle to separate it from the ball joint. Now we loosen the inboard long bolt. Slide it forward and remove the arm.
And here's the front upper control arm, or FUCA. It only needs 2 bushings, one here, and a couple of these sleeves. And this goes in just the same way it came out. And that's looking good. The bolt has pulled the sleeves in towards the center here, and now it's making a really good connection. All right, now it's time to try to get the lower control arm out, and to do that we need to first undo the tie rod end here and the lower ball joint. So we got a couple of cotter pins and a couple of castle nuts. I think it's up. Oh my gosh. Look at that.
And here are our 2 freshly cleaned and painted front lower control arms. They're the last ones to go on, so let's skip the bushings install because we're getting tired of seeing that, and bring them back to the car.
Now we'll offer up the lower control arm.
Alright, so that's how we take care of all the control arm bushings on a Miata. But before we go, let me rattle off a few random tidbits. Number 1, rubber bushings have a spring rate. That's why the front lower control arm snapped up when the ball joint was disconnected, and it's another plus of poly bushes because they don't do that and allow the springs and dampers to do their job. Number 2, if poly bushes aren't race car enough for you, Flying Miata has front control arm spherical bearings that offer no squish or resistance, all for the low price of $280 USD. And number 3, get an alignment. We touched those eccentric bolts, so the car needs to be realigned for both safety and performance, which is what's coming up next. And that's a wrap. Until next time, you're awesome, I'm mostly useless. Thank you so much for watching.